Square One DSM is an initiative of the Greater Des Moines Partnership that mentors, connects, and enhances the potential for success for entrepreneurs in Central Iowa.
Welcome, Laird and Bernard Nasuli.
Thank you.
How'd I do on the last name?
Perfect.
Perfect? Okay,
Great.
I hate to butcher somebody's name. So I met you guys several years ago, and there's been a lot of change in your business. To start, Laird or Bernard, one of you, why don't you talk a little bit about how you got to today? I mean, just the high level, the iEmergent story of how you got here, and we can get into it.
I'll take that one. The company was actually founded by my dad, and he was an executive at Wells Fargo. And in 2000, he left because he was really frustrated with the lack of strategic thinking, strategic data, and those kinds of things. So he embarked on this idea, and we really thought an idea went to business right away. And obviously, we've learned over 16 years that that's not the case. So he did that for quite a while and started forecasting. And I can explain in a different time what that is. But so we started forecasting. He perfected a methodology, or continues to do that. But then in 2010, we realized we had an issue. We were working with large banks, but as our data became more and more detailed, there was no way to communicate it, no way for it to be usable. And so we decided that we needed to come up with more of a product. And really took us a couple of years to figure out exactly what to do. But then we actually contracted with Far Reach, and they're partners with us. And we built MarketSmart. I'll let you keep going.
So what we do, forecasting, I think your hair's doing that. We forecast the number of mortgages in terms of loans and dollars across the U.S. at the state, county, and then down to the census tract area. So that's the forecasting part. And the MarketSmart part that Far Reach helped us build is a dynamic web-based application that allows you to see maps, so a map of the US, and then a map of where exactly those units and dollars are going to happen all over the US. So whether it's by segment, so by race or ethnicity, or by the type of mortgage loan, we can dissect those in many different ways.
Complex stuff.
Yes.
Why do banks care? I mean, your main customer are regional national banks, big banks, right? What is the problem? There's always lots of problems. What's the big problem that you solve, or the two big problems you solve that these banks go, we really want to go pay for this?
Well, basically, like Mike said, there are two big problems. One of them is that now that I don't think I'm touching anything. Now that the market is starting to recover, every market in the US is going to be recovering in a different way. And so because it's really not like it was during the housing boom, where there's a lot of activity, a lot of housing activity, the banks know that they have to be, banks and lenders know that they have to be smart about where they put their resources. So on one hand, we help them figure out where to deploy their people, their products, where really, instead of looking at it as this is our strategy, which market is our best strategy. The other side of that, though, and I think it's really going to be where a lot of our product continues to go, is in compliance. The Consumer Finance Protection Bureau has really set down some new structure and new laws that they need help, really dealing with. And since our data looks ahead, we're really the only way they have for figuring out how to be where they need to be, as opposed to the approach to the compliance now is, how did we do last year? So really, those are the two big places, efficiency and revenue through improving the sales, and then the compliance piece.
And I'll add to that it's a question of using your resources intelligently. So no company has an infinite number of resources. And so if they have a better idea of where the mortgages are going to be, then they can better figure out where to open new branches, or where to hire loan officers, or where to do targeted marketing campaigns.
Yeah, we were having a discussion the other day with young couples or young people moving in, that's a real target. And sometimes banks miss that because they don't realize that churn's taking place. So it's really from primarily consultative. I've got a couple of customers I consult to. I'm not trying to sell every bank in the nation a product. So that service to product thing. How did that start for you?
Well, of course, it started out of necessity because we realized that we couldn't stay at, as a consultancy. But really, as we make this progression, we really realize it really is a progression. We didn't just say, okay, consult, okay, product. We've sort of had to wean ourselves and our clients and prospects away from thinking of us as, we're going to come in and we're going to help you solve the problem and solve the problem. And the other side of that is, there's this great tool, this great information. Let's make it easier for you to use it. What we didn't understand, and what the challenge was, though, is that there's a big gap there. Because we're bringing something that nobody else has brought, there's a huge learning curve. And so we built something that worked for everybody, and we thought it was the best choice to have a lot of options and like capabilities and things like that. But as we started trying to sell it, we realized for everybody else, they didn't even know where to start. They didn't even know where to take this product and place it. And so the consultancy part is really now helping them figure out how to implement, integrate, and get value.
Sounds interesting. Are they accepting it? Where are things at from sales? How are you doing?
So we have grown since last year in terms of the number of clients. I believe it's by 50% more clients than last year, which is good. So we're heading in the right direction. The big challenge, as Mike knows, is our sales cycles are horrendously long. It can take anywhere from 24 months down, to a year to make first contact with a lender, and then to actually convince them to meet with senior leaders to say, hey, this is a good idea, let's move forward. And it needs everyone's approval in-house, it seems like. So the sales cycles are arduously long.
And this is something I think most startups don't really think too much about when they get started. Is it's not about the product so much as it's, okay, somebody likes the product in a corporation. From that time when they see it and like it to the time that a check gets written to your bank account, what's that time frame? One, how long has it taken? Two, how many people are in the decision matrix? It's a lot easier to sell to a small company where one person makes the decisions, right? Versus in some of your deals, there's probably more than 10 people involved in making a decision.
Yeah, absolutely. They're all the functions have to sign off. So you have to get approval from finance, from marketing, from
compliance,
from compliance, from legal. Everyone wants to make sure they're involved in that decision and to sign off.
And I think that's one of the challenges too with offering a product that does everything. You start talking about all the problems they can solve, and they spend time, brainstorming about how to use it instead of actually going forward and using it. So I think as we do more, we have to start creating modules and sell to the problem that you're talking about today instead of moving on and trying to say, well, you could do this and you could do this and you could do that, because ultimately that just slows things down for us.
So selling, you've had to learn how to sell. Look at the expression. We've had we spent a lot of time together talking about how to sell, and it's interesting, but I think that there was a quote the other day that made me think of you, and it was from a very famous entrepreneur who says, if you're not selling, you're not growing. And it was speaking to the core entrepreneur, not the sales team they hire, but the CEO is out there, the founder, the leader is out there selling. And I'd like you to talk about that a little bit, because you've been through this. If you're talking to people are out here who have not started a company or thinking about starting one, talk about sales.
Well, just the first thing that came to my mind is much more difficult than I ever imagined. And I didn't realize how much I didn't necessarily like it. And one of the things I was concerned about, because I kind of took the helm really quickly overnight when my dad became ill. And so I was suddenly a CEO and suddenly talking to CEOs of national banks, and dealing with people who knew that I didn't have a lot of industry experience to back it up. I spent a lot of time worrying about what they thought of who I was, not enough time thinking about what does this product do, what do they need, and how do I make that connection. What Mike made me realize is that, number one, it's possible to talk way too much. and not be clear, because what's clear to you isn't clear to them. And two, that it's just a numbers game, that you have to just keep doing it, making the phone calls, following up. And I didn't follow that advice as well as I could have, for sure, because it really is challenging to make those phone calls.
I wish I could find a way to explain to people how hard it is to make. I have one client right now that's making 35 cold calls a day, 3 days a week. And the other 2 days a week she spends following up on those calls. And that's every week. And it's hard for people to understand how hard that is to go in a room, close the door, and call 35 people you don't know, try to sell them your product cold. I grew up around it because we used to have to do it in the car business, but it is extremely hard to do, and it's a mental challenge. I mean, physically anybody can dial a phone, right? We all have voices. Most of us have a voice. We can talk. It's a mental challenge, and I think for startups, if they're not willing to make those phone calls, they've got to really question: should you be starting a company? Should you be doing this if you don't want to make those phone calls? I think these days, because it's more about the marketing than the product. I mean, your product isn't simple by any stretch, but your product worked well long before you could get people to sign up for it and buy it. It wasn't, oh, you're missing all the features, it doesn't work. It was, how do we get you from interesting to sign a check?
Right.
You recently hired your first outside employee.
We did.
Talk about that a little bit.
Well, we hired a chief growth officer. And he
Salesperson.
Salesperson, right? That's what he said. He said what I need to be as a chief growth officer so that I can talk to the right people. What's interesting about him is that he was a client. So for 2 years, I talked to him on the phone, and he got to know the tool, got to know us, and then we realized that there was this really good fit. So it took us some time, actually it took about a couple of months to make the move, and then Bernard and I just kind of jumped in with it, and I think we're really excited about how it's going. We're just hit the 60-day mark with him. But the challenge is going from having a lot less structure to needing to structure all parts of the business so that everybody's comfortable. We can be more transparent and just organized, because we're not doing just things the way we've always done it in our heads, and he needs really more structure.
Yeah, so the challenge remains the sales cycle. So he has been in the industry over 10 years and has built up good contacts over his time. He's been a loan officer. He's been part of an executive team at a lender. So he definitely has the knowledge, but shortening that sales cycle is still a challenge, as he's finding out. I think he didn't think it would be taking as long as it has been with certain clients and prospects.
Yeah, and I think one of the things it speaks to is when you do deal with a longer sales cycle, you can't measure success in sales versus not sales.
Right.
If you just measure that, you're going to wait 2 years to see if he or she sold something, and that's really far too long to wait. So you have to find a lot of ways to measure in between. Are you using systems to do that? What kind of tracking do you do? Without getting the really nitty details, how do you track success along the way?
Yeah, so a CRM, the customer relationship manager, we use Insightly. And he puts his entire day in there, but it's the question of, okay, who are you going to call today? How many calls? What are you going to talk about? So there's the piece of the number of touches you're going to reach out to the prospects, the content. What are you going to talk about this week, next week, the month after, and so on, and then making sure that you are consistently following up in a timely manner, so that you have done everything you can on your end to reach out to those potential sales.
Is he targeting an area or region, or how are you dividing things up?
We're initially starting with his contacts. So the people he knows he's comfortable with, we're going after the low-hanging fruit, so the easiest possible sales, where they at least know him. So that hurdle is off the table. Now he has an advantage because he was also one of our clients, so he knows our tool. He knows he's used it. He sees the value and the power, and so with his experience coupled with his knowledge of the industry makes a much easier conversation for him to say, "Hey, I've been in your shoes, and I've used it to help my company grow. It can do the same for yours."
Has that part of it paid off? Can he open doors? Do his contacts get him through the gate?
Yes, absolutely. So Mike always talks about the funnel and the numbers game. So the more contacts you have, the more potential sales you have. And so he's really reached out to a good 50.
Like this we've never had as much activity as we have now. And it's exciting for us, a little bit scary because we have, it would be a lot to do very suddenly if everybody's sales cycle suddenly shortened. But he really is bringing things in. And the other thing he's also brought in is that, telling us what he needs to sell. So he's talked to 50 people and he sees the gaps in our message, the gaps in our product. Now he's able to articulate that to us so that we then can make sure on our side we're supporting him with what he needs to sell ultimately.
Yeah, it's funny, 'cause for a lot of you who've been in the entrepreneurial thing, there's a term called minimum viable product that's become all the rage in the last 5 years, and it's really a well-cast idea. And the idea is don't try to build the entire product and go to market, build the minimum you need and get out there and get feedback, because no matter how good you are to market a product in your thoughts, what you think and what the customer thinks tends to be two different things, and until they can touch it, they really can't give you good feedback. I can talk to somebody like Dave, you buy software for certain things in your business. I can talk to all day long about it, but until you can actually touch it and use it and interact with it, you really don't know what it needs to do or not needs to do. So it's that idea of getting out there as quickly as possible, the live customer really buying in that actual process to find out, does this really work? Do they really use it? Is a big, big deal.
And ultimately, the end user, who we built it for, isn't who's using it. So,
Talk about that.
well, we originally built this, and as Chris and Kate know, thinking that the primary buyer would be like a branch manager or a community bank, because our data allows us to really drill down to the local level. So suddenly, these banks and small lenders are going to have a tool that they've never had before. So we thought that would just really spark interest. Well, in reality, it's difficult to find companies of that size that want to be strategic, that want to even think about using data and analytics. And so the challenge isn't just that, it's not really necessarily a cost issue, it's a knowledge and resource issue. So instead of a branch manager, we actually realized we're dealing with really C-level people for the most part, which that took that sales cycle and expanded it. I mean, we spent a ton of time with a credit card processor on our website. We've had one credit card sale in 3 years. So that just shows you, we thought we were going to do a lot of little things, but we're actually doing fewer really large things.
How do you market your product?
Well, we're just getting started in terms of where we're going beyond our contact base. But we're really selling three things. We sell the product, but to sell the product, we have to sell the data. And to sell the data, we have to sell the approach. And the banking industry is relatively transactional. So we have to introduce the concept of forward thinking before we can even talk about why a forecast is important. So our marketing right now is really all about education. And we've been lucky enough, or I shouldn't say lucky enough, we've had quite a few feature articles published in some of the largest industry magazines. That's been helpful. But we really haven't figured out the secret yet to how we connect with all of these small banks and the banks and lenders that we don't know.
But I think it's a point that I'd like to dig a little deeper on. You've been very successful with getting into these magazines that are trade journals. They're specific to the banking industry. You're on the cover sometimes. I mean, nobody can even buy that cover, and yet you're getting it. Talk about how you've gotten that to happen and the value of it.
Well, I think going back to that idea of innovation, the industry wants to be innovative. It wants to use big data. It wants to be doing the things it should be doing. So the industry publications try to lead that. And our product, again, it's the only product that does this type of forecasting, but it also is really a good-looking product. So there were some really great maps and tables. So there's a wow factor attached to that. So what we've managed to do is write really pretty compelling articles, not sales articles, but articles about how come why should they do this type of work? Why should they think this way? And what's the benefit at the end of the day? And since it's so new, I think that the industry magazines are excited to put it on there.
And I think that's something people have to think about is you want to be really super innovative for this industry and help solve all their problems, but you're going to hit this large wall of resistance of, you're just saying it very, very well, before I can begin to sell them my product, or my data. I have to sell them on the idea that this is a good approach to even take. I have to educate them that the road I'm asking you to drive down is actually a good road to drive down. And I think that's the other thing. I see people really underestimating how hard that is. Having salespeople that come from the industry helps that process, but
it does. And you don't think about the fact that when you have competition, they're helping pay for that education. Whereas, it's really up to us to start talking to people and really being the messenger of this.
So what else from a marketing standpoint? I know you guys are blogging a little bit. You've got some email newsletters.
We've also done some strategic partnerships.
Okay.
So one is we've partnered on a pilot program with a mortgage insurance company. So they have the same customers that we are targeting, and since it's a large company, they have around 1,500 lenders that they have customers that are customers, and we've done a pilot approach to specifically target diverse markets and diverse lending. So what we're talking about is helping lenders be able to lend to Hispanics, to African Americans, to Asians in their markets, and that's a twofold win for them. One is that from a growth perspective, the number of new households over the next 10 years will be 75% from those markets, from those diverse markets. So 75% of new households will be African American, Asian, and Hispanic. And then the other thing, so from a business standpoint, it makes sense. But from the other thing is that it will help them actually lend in their communities and grow their communities, which is what they're tasked to do. At least banks are mandated to do that by the federal government. So in terms of being the lenders, all lenders go through some audits to make sure that they're not being discriminatory in their lending practices. So from those two things, so the mortgage insurer is one, and then we've also teamed up with a mortgage cooperative that has 200 or so smaller members, but it's also an entry into that pool that we would normally not be able to reach. So getting access to those folks has also helped us spread the word and talk directly to senior leaders at those companies in order to get the word out.
But I think you bring up a good point, and that's that two partnerships with organizations that have good contacts. We're having quite a bit of success with one, not as much with the other. I think you have to look at your product and look at the partner and not assume every partner that is targeting the same people you are is going to work, because they can all have the relationships, but the level of relationships they have and whether you fit with what they do is, I think, a huge it really determines whether it's successful or not, right? I mean,
yeah, at the beginning, I mean, you go to a channel partner because they own a relationship you don't. They get you into a door you can't get into. But as you found out, I know a little bit, it doesn't mean they can sell your product. They may not sell your product very well at all. They may actually make it sound not so good. I'm trying to be polite about this. But I do think as you're looking at how your product goes through a channel, you have to think about suddenly that person helping you may not do a nice job of helping you. They may hurt your brand, not help your brand. And I think that's a real problem.
Yeah, and I think we're on our way to figuring that out.
For the first time.
Yes.
I don't know why. I had to keep figuring it out for about 20 years. You just don't know. I mean, the other thing I would say about it is you've got to get into the market quick with them to find out if they're any good.
Yes.
You can spend 9 months negotiating a contract with a partner only to find out 30 days in they never knew what the hell they were doing anyway, and now you've just thrown 10 months down the window. So start thinking of your questions. I was going to open it up here to the audience in a couple of minutes. You guys work together. You're married. How's that working out?
well, I think
We're still married.
And on top of it all, you have children
Yes.
and dogs, if I remember right. You do, yeah. So complex life.
It is. I think that if you are going to work with family, you have to do an even better job of having each person work on what they're good at. Since you kind of figured that out in the marriage already, hopefully. If you have that same sort of approach to the office, it's helpful. But at the end of the day, we have to compromise more because we have to get along. We have to make this work. The company won't keep moving forward if we don't get along. And so I think in times where maybe I would have held a grudge or made a certain choice, we make the best choice for the team because it doesn't just impact us, it impacts our whole family, people who are working with us, our partners, our kids. So
I'll open up to questions. Yes, in the back, Curdy.
I know you say no one's doing this today, but if someone sees a cool idea, we'd love to come in. And you started anticipating what competition you might have and how are you differentiating?
Well, I think that in terms of competition, one of the risks we run since we're dealing with big national companies is that they start doing it in-house. So when they're working with us, we're always a little bit, always have to be watching how much of our method we share. Knowing how difficult the method is to develop, I think it's going to take some time for someone to come in, but at the same time, once we have some success, or we've been successful, we just we're not well known. Once we have that, plus kind of the cool thing idea, I think we will have some entrants. But I'm hoping that our relationships are strong enough that we still sort of stay in that premier spot. And then also the other thing that's really sort of a challenge for us is if some of the federal data sources get better, they're going to be able to access some of the data that we have much more timely. Right now, to get that federal data, they have to wait anywhere from 6 to 18 months from a time frame to have really, really actionable data at the market level. Well, that's going to be changing. And so if that becomes real time, then we're not going to have such a value proposition that they really need this because they can't use that other information.
I kind of have a stupid question. Is this a computer program where you had to do programming and write your own program?
Yeah, how's it built?
Our developers.
Well,
I've done
You
that.
might talk about how people use it.
Yeah, so it's a web-based application. So you just type an address, and then you have an account that you log into. But it's a map of the U.S. and you're able to. So if I'm a lender and I have locations, physical locations, I can upload those locations. If I have loan officers, so people talking to actual customers on the street, then you can upload those loan officers to see their volume. So whenever they do a mortgage, you can actually see it on the map. And you can also divide it up by branch. So you can say, okay, this branch did 100 loans this month and this one did 200. What's going on? You can, by visually seeing it, you can identify, are there gaps in my market? Am I not covering an area? Is that on purpose, or do I need to address that? So the whole idea is that being able to see it visually and online from anywhere really helps. That's the wow factor.
Yeah, to give you an idea, when I first saw some of their data, it's just a really large spreadsheet full of a tremendous number of numbers. And the amount of time and knowledge it takes just to even understand what am I even looking at versus seeing it like so many things, a visualization with some cues is just amazing. Yeah, in the back. Here.
So I was curious about the consultative part of your business in terms of, like you say, you decided to shift from consulting to products, and I just wondered if there is a hybrid.
Good question.
Sometimes because people that are how
Consultative versus selling. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right that it will always be a hybrid. I mean, I think that at least when we're dealing with certain levels in the organization, our vision as we look forward is to have something that's like a light version that more people, everyone can access without needing us. But right now, I mean, in reality, I'd say it's a 50-50 consultancy data / the tool. And we don't charge extra for that. We just are committed to helping them get to the value, and it takes that consulting to get there. And that could be an issue that we face from now on.
there could be a revenue stream.
Yeah.
How it gets figured into your separate.
So discussion we've had a lot about the consulting side versus the product side. And so the paradox is if you build, so let's assume they would like to sell this company someday and have an exit where they could gain back some of the equity they put into it. If you really want to have an exit in a company, if it's primarily consulting, the valuation is extremely orders of magnitude lower than if you're selling a reoccurring product. So while it may be very helpful to do consulting to get your product off the ground, Let's say you get to where you have 10,000, clients, it's a huge company. If it's half consulting, they'll devalue your company by a factor of 3 because it's half consulting. So do you do it yourself? Do you have outsiders do it? Are you now competing with the consultants that might recommend you? So if they only do the consulting, then suddenly everybody else that's in the consulting world won't like them too much. They're competitive. If they can find a way to enable all the consultants to use the product as part of consulting, they build a much larger market. So it is not a simple question to answer because it's very complex, but I think.
And I think one of the ways we're addressing it is, you had a good point, we're selling through consulting on a sort of an industry-wide basis. As we market, most of our materials are really about the kinds of things you would talk to them about as a consultant. So we're hoping that as we build, that education process and it becomes clear what they're supposed to do when they are working with our data or our tool, that's going to help minimize the consulting time. We're doing some webinars, things like that. And we didn't really focus at all on the help and the resources, the menu for videos, help videos, things like that. We didn't focus on that because we knew that we'd be changing things as we go. So I think that was potentially a mistake because I do think there have been a couple of times where just like we stopped doing free trials because people will get in there and they're like, I have no idea what to do. Well, they're gone. You can't get to that. So we took away the free trial, which I think was a good thing, unless we can be involved first. And we realized that people need a lot more direction. And it's our responsibility to have that available.
Yeah.
With multiple banks and uploading data from these various banks. And then there's been a request for competitive analysis from the banks to be able to do it as a separate product.
Yeah, if I can restate it for everybody else. So you have customers come to you and say, can you help us do competitive analysis with our other banks in the market? Is that basically?
So as long as it's publicly available data, we're happy to do that. The issue is we're not going to take our customers' information and share it with anyone else, even with another customer. I mean, we're just not going to do that. We also make sure that the main data on which our forecasting is built is publicly available. So that's why it's a little bit dated because the government takes a while to process it, but it does contain the gold standard for data quality, and so it is trusted that way, and we are able to do any kind of analysis based on that information.
But one of the things we've learned, it's I think interesting to share, is that we've had to learn how to talk to people about improving their position in a market without looking at how their neighbors are doing. Because looking at the untapped market, looking at the potential, the opportunity, instead of saying, well, someone from Wells Fargo looks at Chase and says, well, we're better than Chase, so we're fine here. That doesn't really work, especially when you're talking about the compliance and diverse markets, because there's so much opportunity that's out there that's not being tapped because they just don't have the right, a right approach to dealing with these different groups.
Yeah, I think that's a big deal when you can build a product that helps somebody expand beyond their known market. It's not, I have to go take this away from a competitor, which can be really hard to do. There's a whole, greenfield area that no one's touched, and I have a shot at getting that first. Question? Yes?
So this sort of goes with a couple of questions that have been asked here. This is with regard to compliance and regulation, regulatory. So do you want to be considered the person, organization that knows it all, is the most up-to-date, or are you in a position where you going to your client and saying, okay, we know you're the expert in knowing about compliance and regulatory matters. What I'm seeing here is where you can be a consultant,
Right.
but they probably know a lot too. I mean, how do you handle that sort of? Because I think in banks, so there's a big banks, there's a whole building full of lawyers and marketing people who are going to tell you, what you're talking about.
Well, I think we have to work with those people. And they do know more about the law, the structure. What we end up talking to them about, though, is what's the approach? How do you use data to help you deal with that? And I'll be honest, we've learned so much from our clients in terms of, what do these different regulations require? What could potential strategies be? But that has allowed us, because we've seen it from a lot of organizations, to come up with an approach and a way of explaining it that makes sense. It's pretty surprising how little information is actually being used to make some of those decisions, and how much, well, I should say how much information is really not being used. They're really feeling like they're swimming and they don't have a paddle. So they look to us for that help in the solution. We look to them for helping, sort of define what the problem is.
I think one of the things that I see in startups in the Midwest, there are a lot of people working on compliance challenges. And I'm not going to get political, but you can say there's too many compliance laws, and then you can say, you can look at the results. Sometimes they get on, like yesterday, there was quite a result of someone not following the compliance laws. So without talking about that, compliance is a challenge that's non-competitive. If there are 5 of us in the room that are bankers, we would all like to make compliance a straightforward process to say, we're doing the right thing, we're reporting as best as we possibly can, and our risk to that is very, very low. And we would all be better off to do it together. So I think for entrepreneurs looking for problems to solve, that's one of the biggest problems out there right now for a lot of people is, how do I stay compliant? How do I do this? Because I've got to be focused on my customers, my products, and my people, and all this other stuff. So somebody else go solve that. And there's been several really interesting startups lately that have had at least one part of the company, if not the entire company, is on compliance.
Yeah, you mentioned that you have some good articles out there in terms of consumer education. You tried anything else in terms of educating potential clients that big data is the way to go and that your product works?
Well, we actually just finalized our marketing content plan for this coming, really the next coming 14 months, and that's a big part of it. First starting at that high level of how do you really talk about that approach, get them thinking about big data. So articles are a good way for that, but we're also trying to figure out the right tone for introducing infographics, our maps are very kind of along the infographic side, but just, case studies, stories, what can make them understand and see in the information a problem that's being solved, as opposed to just seeing all the information. So I think I think we have to focus on it, but I don't think we've figured out yet exactly, how to do that.
It's creating that content from within to be able to share it externally. So one example that we actually did create is a blog about what are the top 10 largest markets in the U.S. And so a lender would have a vague idea or a really good idea about, okay, these are the top 10 biggest cities, so these are the top 10 answers. But so the twist on that I added was, when you add one of our metrics, which measures the speed of growth over the next 5 years, the top 10 get all jumbled up and some fall out, some new ones come in. And so you can talk about, so the importance is not just to know your gut feeling, but to actually pair it with quantitative data and these other metrics to be able to say, oh, well, if New York is a great market, but if I want to be there in 5 years, it's not going to be one of the hotter markets.
Now, just to add on to that, I think that if anybody is doing anything in social media with business right now, one of the things that works really well is a headline like, the top 5 ways to do X, the list of 7. And a lot of people have talked about why that works, and I think it is simply quantification. There are so many flaming headlines, positive, negative, compelling, scary, whatever, but they're subjective headlines. And I think anything we can do with customers, especially in business, to give them quantifiable and defensible data they can actually believe in. And we're having quite the national discussion about, what's truth and what's not truth. And businesses face this every day. They've got people coming to with reams of data saying, buy my data, buy my data. And the real challenge to the entrepreneur of the business is to show why the data is defensible and how you got there. And to that point, how many people realize, well, the 5 markets today that are the top aren't going to be the 5 markets that are top 3 months from now? Or Maybe there's somebody inside of a company that's been saying that for a year, but nobody else will listen to them. But by getting it somebody from the outside to say the exact same thing, I don't know how you, but I have been in that situation so many times. It took an outsider to get the attention. Next question. Yeah, Curdy.
Yeah, so we actually went through an interesting process in the last couple of months. We are planning a pretty large, over the next 15 months, really looking at how to do that. How to even get it down to, there's like a reader version or something that really we could potentially even offer for free. And that's just, potentially. But we went through the client discovery process, which was really interesting. And so we had an outside person call up our clients. First we of course asked them if they wanted to participate, and they all did, which was, I think, and it took some time, a testament to the fact that they're committed. So we had him interview and talk to them about the things that they liked, things they didn't like, but even away from that, what are the problems they're facing, and what else are you using? What other types of data are you using in your organization? We didn't want to do it because we have pretty relatively closer relationships with them now. They've known us, our story's interesting, so we didn't want to have that color it. So he did that, and then he also reached out to some prospects that said no, and a couple former clients. And getting that information was really invaluable. It was completely worth the process.
Yeah, but exactly to your point, we've thought about a monthly subscription for loan officers, so a $20 a month type of product where they can't do any of the analysis, but they could zoom around their own neighborhood, something like that, where they could bring that information to a realtor and say, hey, partner with me, I'm bringing you this information. We've talked about down the road potentially creating something for big box stores where retailers could use our same information, so going into a different industry. We've talked about the compliance piece, where if we build something specifically for compliance to help lenders pass audits, that could potentially be a different product set as well.
Any more questions? Yeah.
So I'm actually from a forecast. My background is forecasting as well. I used to work for equipment industry forecasting,
Mm-hmm.
and I know that forecasting is good, but how do we quantify this? How do I know? Like, if I have a better forecast, I know that's going to be better, but how do we quantify the revenue I'm going to get by a better forecast, or savings? And eventually this quest turned into a different module for us, for a company. We ended up saying, this is a better forecasting tool. Plus, we buy this module, we can also quantify how much we save or how much extra revenue.
Good idea.
That's
So,
fascinating. I mean,
Is there, have you ever?
we've never thought of, actually, we've really never thought of doing it as a tool. I mean, that's a fantastic question. And I think it's similar to, they do wonder if it's working. And even today on the telephone, I was trying to introduce the idea that with forecasting, it's not perfect. So she's like, well, what are the actuals? And it was about a forecast. What are the actuals? I said, there's only estimates. There's no actual because, it's a decennial census. You get that every 10 years. And we have a lot of trouble teaching them how to use something that isn't right. I mean, forecasting is never right. You know that. So we have trouble because if they do follow what, let's say they use our forecast and they find a great market. They go to that great market and they have a lot of success. Well, maybe they would have gone to that great market anyway. Maybe they go to that great market and they're not successful, not because our forecast didn't help, but because they put the wrong manager there or did something else wrong. So it's impossible. I mean, it isn't impossible. It's very difficult. And we are asked for those results and don't always have them.
I love the idea that you sold them a tool so that you could prove back to them that they're making money with the first tool you sold them. I like that.
Brilliant.
It is.
The contract was like, if you can prove that we saved your increased revenue by 10%, And the contract was instead of X million, it was
Right.
Y million. So
But I do think it gets to a core point of anybody's building a product for a company, 2, 3 years down the road, when it's time for the license to renew, you better be able to prove you made a money. Because when, you're in a downturn in the ag industry right now, if you're selling software to the ag industry and you can't prove it makes the money, you probably aren't going to get renewed because they're looking for places to cut. And there is something called the business cycle. Things go up and down. So, it's a valid point.
It is.
Yeah, the add-on to that is that we've tried to come at them with the break-even point. So our products are annual subscriptions for a state. So for California, you pay X amount. And so we say, if you gain an additional 7 loans, you've paid for the product. And so based on, imagine with much better information, much more precise, can you do 7 more loans and pay for it? You're right.
Quickly.
We've got time for one more question. We'll take the last one. No, Mark.
Jared, you kind of touched on this. I mean, you folks had a long growth curve, all pretty much a family operation, and 95 outside, like, structure that you had to build. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
You better talk about structure because I have none.
Yeah, so we've actually hired also an executive analyst to be able to help with some of that structure that you're talking about. But this first hire, when we were thinking, we could hire a statistician and make sure to nail down our forecasting methodology to be able to explain it to potential clients. Or we could hire somebody internally, like maybe a CFO or something like that. But really, we decided, let's go. We have to get some sales. So that's the first order of business. But you're right. As things grow, we're going to have much more structure. We're going to have to talk about the mission and vision of our company, and our partners at Far Reach reminded us of that, which was quite good.
And you don't even think about the fact that structure is as simple as what is your file naming system and how you're naming your files. How come that would matter? Well, now suddenly somebody else needs to look at my files from 5 years ago, and I have to look through it for 5 hours to find one. So those simple things do matter early on.
Well, and how you track and communicate. You guys actually did put a lot of tools in. It's just, the idea of it isn't just 2 people. When there's 2 of us sitting across the room talking to each other constantly, you don't need a lot of tools to make it work. But when that person's in Atlanta, so it isn't just talk across the room.
And so I attended one of the startup stories a few months ago, and the person talked about Slack, which is an instant messaging tool. And a day later, we implemented it, and we've been hooked on it ever since. And it's made that communication much easier, especially since our chief growth officer is in a different time zone and a different schedule, and it's been wonderful.
Well, thank you both very much for coming. If everybody could join me in giving a round of applause, I appreciate you coming today.
One last thing I wanted to mention was, Mike doesn't necessarily like the spotlight, but we owe so much to Mike for all his help over the years. So we want to thank you, Mike. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for embarrassing me. I appreciate it. September 29th is the Raising Capital Seminar. There's just a few seats left, and October 19th is our next Startup Stories. Thanks, everybody, for coming.